Hey up! Last week wasn't a very good week for those of you that like to travel around under your own steam in a motor car or on a motorcycle. Last week the Welsh Government announced some significant changes to road traffic law in Wales. Changes that are significant because they are going to affect all of us in the UK in the long term. It's not a surprise, but you're not going to like it. Anyway, I edited that video together and uploaded it for publication today, but then this other subject about the banning of petrol motorcycles reared its ugly head again. So I've rescheduled the other video that I've just been talking about until Friday, and I'm making this video for upload today because I think it's probably a more urgent subject. Now, I don't like making these videos. I'd much prefer to be making different, more sort of upbeat videos, but no one else talks about these things, which I think is a sign of the times. The use of fossil-fueled vehicles has been demonised in a very short space of time. They're evil. And the way this world's going, I genuinely believe we're not far away from that time where people will confront you in the street and tell you that you're an evil person for riding or driving a vehicle that is powered by fossil fuels. It's coming. Now, some people might consider this to be a rambly video, but the thing is, you can't talk about these subjects in isolation. A lot of the people that watch these videos will be watching them in isolation, so you need some context. You need to talk about why this is happening. This is a big subject, and I can't just take it for granted that everyone that's watching it has also watched all of my other videos. I know that doesn't happen. So, if you don't like the rambling bit, skip to the end for the most important information to you, or just switch off now and go and watch a different video. Now, the Department for Transport has announced that motorcycles of 125cc and below are going to be included in the 2030 ban on the sale of petrol vehicles, with the ban on the sale of larger motorcycles to take place in 2035. Now, as usual, they have very quietly, almost secretly, published a public consultation, but at the same time they've made it very clear that they're not going to change their minds about this. It's going to go ahead. That's democracy for you. Although, actually, no, it isn't, is it? That's not how democracy works. But that is how this whole transport reformation has been carried out by our government and other governments around the world. They had no mandate from the electorate to do these things, and they're just steamrolling them into place. Our current shambolic government is acting like a dictatorship, and so many other governments around the world. It needs to stop. Now, I won't use the word brainwash. We're all conditioned from a very early age to trust in science. Scientists are put on a pedestal, almost godlike beings. We learn at school that they're going to solve all of society and civilization's problems. They're going to create new technology that's going to allow the human race to excel far beyond anything that it's done so far. We are taught to trust science and not to question it, because scientists are far more intelligent and knowledgeable than we are. And that's exactly what we do. But you see, scientists are not super beings. They're not gods. They're just people, and they have exactly the same flaws that you and I do. I'm sure most of them start off with very firm principles to do only good, but they have the same needs as you or I. They need somewhere to live, they need clothes on the back, and they need to be able to eat. And to achieve that, they need money. Money is their motivation. And I'm not going to beat around the bush. We all know that money can sometimes influence the direction that research goes in. And then there's ego. We all have an ego. Most scientists carry out their research in pursuit of validation of a theory that they have, which in turn can influence their findings. And then we have tribalism. The way science works is that a scientist will make his findings, he'll publish a paper, and then he will submit it for peer review. Other scientists will look at it and either they'll validate it or they'll reject it, and this is where tribalism comes in. The personal agendas of peer groups, or if you like, tribal groups, can result in science being ratified when in actual fact it's flawed. And again, even this can be influenced by money. It's the people at the top that fund the research grants that pull all the strings. Now, when you've lived long enough, let's say you've got past your 30s, you start to see the holes in science. Back in the 1990s, the scientists agreed that oil was going to run out by the year 2000. The environmental and climate scientists crushed the numbers, they did the research, and they told us that despite what we thought, diesel was the way ahead. Yes, it was a little bit more polluting than petrol, but it was much more efficient. So it not only balanced the environmental impact out, it actually was cleaner to use than petrol. And so despite the fact that diesel engined cars were more expensive, about £1,000 more expensive than the equivalent petrol car, we were all persuaded to switch over diesel to help the environment and to save oil. We trusted the science, we trusted the government, and that's what we did. And then about 2 decades later, the scientists and the government told us that that was all wrong. Diesel's evil, we all need to swap back to petrol because diesel is causing far more harm to the environment, to the planet, than petrol does. And we didn't run out of oil. How could they have possibly got that so wrong? 2.5 years ago, a novel coronavirus surfaced in China. It was about the time of the Chinese New Year, where a huge proportion of the Chinese population travel all over the world to visit relatives in other countries to celebrate their New Year. The WHO, or World Health Organization, is an organisation that receives billions of pounds from different countries to study diseases and viruses like the coronavirus and advise the world on how we should best react to protect our populations. They are, if you like, our safety net against pandemics and epidemics. Eminent scientists and doctors who will again crunch the numbers and tell us what we need to do to protect our people. Now, the first reaction by governments all over the world were to close their borders and stop people travelling about so this virus wasn't spread, so that it didn't lead to a pandemic. But the WHO, they told us not to be silly. There was no way that this particular virus could jump from person to person. It was perfectly safe. It was perfectly okay. They told everyone to keep their borders open because if they closed them, it would serve no purpose, the virus wasn't dangerous, and all it would do was wreck the economy of every country concerned. So we did what they advised, and look what happened. Millions of lives lost. How could they have got that so wrong? Now, to me, the most ridiculous part of this is, those climate scientists that advised us back in the 1990s about diesel, and the WHO. We still blindly follow every word that they say. There's no accountability with science. There are no court hearings. There are no inquiries. Everyone just shrugs the shoulders and carries on. And then we have climate change. Human-induced climate change. The climate crisis. It's almost like a cult or a religion. Historically going back, there's always been somebody standing in a town square telling us that the world is about to end. The end is nigh. If you don't repent, if you don't change your ways, if you don't do as we say, the world will end and you'll all burn in eternal damnation. Religious zealots using fear to control people. And this same phenomenon exists right now in the modern world in the form of human-induced climate change and net zero. This is an anti-human ideology justified by the promise that all our sacrifices are going to save the planet, even though all the evidence suggests that it won't. All our sacrifices are not going to make a blind bit of difference. So, to reinforce it, climate change is rammed down our throats at every possible opportunity. Last week we had a heat wave and there were some fires in London, and the BBC blamed it on climate change. The fires were caused by climate change. Those fires weren't caused by climate change, they were caused by careless people. The dry weather was just the enabler. If we get a heat wave, it's climate change. If it's cold, it's climate change. If it's windy, it's blamed on climate change. But climate is chaotic, it's always changed. It's a dynamic, ever-changing phenomenon, and that's what makes it the perfect tool for this agenda. Now, I'm sure by now a lot of you are wondering what the thumbnail to this video is all about. It shows a man called Klaus Schwab, and he is, if you like, the head or spokesperson for an organisation called the World Economic Forum. Now, the thumbnail is intended to be a little bit tongue-in-cheek, because whenever I see this guy giving a speech, he sort of reminds me of your archetypal James Bond villain. To me, there's something creepy and a bit off about him. He's an immensely wealthy man. In fact, it's an immensely wealthy organisation, populated solely by politicians, scientists and billionaires, all of whom have a vision for the future of the human race. Now, the WEF has no political power as such, but it does have enormous political influence. Many world leaders are, if you like, disciples of the WEF, people like Justin Trudeau, and so I've been told Rishi Sunak. The WEF even has very close ties with NATO and the European Union. Now, the WEF's view is that independent countries and sovereignties simply don't work anymore. There needs to be a global power, for want of a better word, a global economic union. And it proposes that in order to facilitate that, we need what it calls the Great Reset. Basically, you push a button and you reset the whole of humanity and the way that humanity is managed. And this organisation's influence has gained momentum substantially since the beginning of the pandemic, which ties in with the sudden ramping up of the climate change phenomenon and net zero. The WEF says that the pandemic is our chance to push the button on the Great Reset. And looking around me, that is exactly what seems to be happening. Over the last 2 years, we've seen previously totally unmentioned legislation regarding personal transport slammed into place in quick succession, one after another. Legislation that won't affect your billionaires and your ruling classes, because they have the money and the means to rise above it and carry on as normal. It's all aimed at ordinary people like me and you. The banning of the sale of petrol vehicles to be replaced with very expensive, short-range, and let's be honest, pretty impractical electric vehicles. Electric vehicles which will have onboard technology that can record and report your whereabouts and your driving behaviour. Technology that can deny the facility of recharging if for some reason you don't fit the right criteria. And this is all in the name of net zero, climate change. You're helping to save the planet. And if you question that, or speak out against it, you're an evil person, you're in league with the devil, a climate change skeptic or climate change denier. Now, during the transition period to this being, absolute, small capacity motorcycles are the best case scenario. They use very little fuel, they create very little pollution. They have the least impact on the environment per mile of any other vehicle. They are in effect the ideal vehicle for slowing down any damage to the planet. So in a sensible, common sense world, there should be the last vehicles to be banned. Small motorcycles are essential for the family man to get to work and back without using the family car and pushing the family expenses up. Small motorcycles are the only option for school leavers, 16 to 18 year olds, to get to college or to the first job that's 10 or 15 miles away from home. Especially those living in rural areas, it's their only option. These bikes are the lifeblood of budget commuting. They're also the gateway to, a lifelong motorcycling passion, freedom of movement, in a way that has minimal impact on the roads, the environment and other people. Yet, earlier this month, the Department for Transport, headed by the infamous Trudy Harrison, announced that the 50 to 125 capacity motorcycle category is going to be brought forward 5 years, and the sale of these machines will be banned from 2030, not 2035, with the sale of larger capacity bikes still to be axed in 2035. Trudy Harrison has been very vocal in telling the public that owning and driving a motor vehicle of any kind, whether it be electric or petrol driven, is a thing of the past and we need to get out of the habit. She does not want the populace travelling around under their own steam. The Department for Transport was founded to ensure safe, efficient and cost-effective travel for the populace and for the movement of goods and services. But in the last year, the Department for Transport has turned into the Department Against Transport. They want to put in place a regime of personal travel restriction similar to that of a communist regime. In fact, possibly even worse. She doesn't want us driving cars or riding motorcycles. She wants us to walk or use a bicycle. And if that's not practical, she wants us to take the bus or use a train. And she's creating an atmosphere of ridicule and shame for those who want to maintain transport independence. She wants us to remain close to our own homes. She doesn't want us travelling far afield. She doesn't want us living where we want to live. She wants us to live near to work and near to the shops. In essence, what Trudy Harrison and our government want is a regression back to Victorian times, where the population is born, lives and dies without ever having moved more than 50 miles away from home in their entire lives. This, I believe, is part of the Great Reset. Now, the proposals for banning the sale of these smaller motorcycles have been set out on the government website, along with a public consultation form that you can fill in. But Trudy Harrison has made it very clear that they will consult with you, but they won't be changing their minds and they will not be moving the deadlines. Like everything else we've seen so far, no matter what the public's opinions are on what the government is doing, they're just blatantly ignoring it and putting it into place anyway. And it's time we told them to stop. I suspect that in order to mitigate this move, the government is probably going to tell us that there are already a plethora of small capacity equivalent e-bikes on sale that will do the job just as well. So small capacity bikes are no longer required. This isn't true. Yes, there are plenty of them around, but the ranges are ridiculously short. 45 to 60 mile range being the norm. They are woefully inadequate for proper daily commuting. Most of them must be charged up at home. They're not compatible with public chargers. And because of the inherent limitations of an electric motorcycle, I can't see them improving that much before the deadline. Electric motorcycles, in my opinion, are not a practical proposition for the foreseeable future, and for any government to expect technology to catch up with legislation is an irresponsible burden to put on the public. Having said that, this runs exactly in line with the regime that the government is trying to set up. Electric vehicles limit how far you can travel, and they don't want you to travel very far. Now, usually when I make this kind of video on this sort of subject, I get responses from people in the comments saying, well, it doesn't bother me, you know. By the time all this bites properly, I'll be dead and gone, so, you know, I don't care. What I'll say to those people is think of your children, your grandchildren, or even your great-grandchildren, because they are going to pay for your inaction and complacency now. Their quality of life is going to be greatly diminished as a result of what is happening. They're probably going to see more hardship than you've seen, a lower standard of living, a far poorer quality of life, because you didn't speak out for them when you had a chance to. Find out who your local MP is. Write them a letter or send them an email outlining what your concerns are and why you're unhappy with the behaviour of the government. Their shambolic do as we say and not as we do attitude to the public has brought this country to its knees, and they're just going to bring it down further if we don't speak out. There is power in numbers. The more people write to these people, the more likely they are to actually pay attention and contemplate changing the ways. They need to know that we will vote them out if they continue with this abusive relationship. I will leave a link to the Motorcycle Action Group's article on this latest development. In that article there are links to the government website and the questionnaire on the subject. By all means fill it in, but be careful. As we've seen before, the Department for Transport formulates these questionnaires as a riddle. They are designed to trip you up and are intentionally difficult to fill in, so be wary. Now, it goes without saying that the Motorcycle Action Group are taking this up on our behalf. I haven't had chance to speak to anyone there about this as yet, but rest assured I will, and I will come back to you with an update as soon as I have any further information. And finally, before I go, I'm also going to leave a link to the World Economic Forum's website. Have a read of it, it's interesting. It comes across as a warm, fairy, benevolent society that only has your best interests at heart. But at the same time, it has a sort of unsettling undertone. It's the sort of spiel that I imagine a cult leader preaching to his flock shortly before he hands them a cup of poison, telling them that they'll achieve salvation when they drink. Now, I do welcome other people's take on what's going on. Feel free to leave a comment, but please keep it short and keep it respectful. I appreciate that this whole climate change, net zero subject is an emotive one for many people, but that's not an excuse for forgetting your manners. Once again, thank you so much for watching this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really do appreciate it. I hope you found this video insightful. If you have, please leave a like, and if you're not already a subscriber, consider subscribing to this channel. It's totally free of charge and you can unsubscribe at any time. I will, as I've already said, be back on Friday, so until then please ride safely and I'll see you soon.